Great.
Excellent.
Good deal. Thanks, all. I appreciate the opportunity to share some story here. I know a lot of folks, or maybe a few folks for sure, who are in the audience, both online, maybe even in person, have already seen or heard some of this. But I assure you that while I generally do this presentation in an hour time block, I'll do my darndest to get it done in 15 minutes, mindful of the time of my other presenters. And a little sneak preview, I saw Dan Smiley following me up. Dan was part of this response as well, so always a pleasure seeing his name and his face too. Looking forward to hearing your presentation to follow. So Genius Star 11, Anna, thanks for presenting the slides. I think if you can go ahead and advance to the next one, please. I'll do my best to cover a lot of information here. Some of it will go fairly quickly through, but I want to try and highlight aspects specifically related to the cargo and really the response actions. Next slide, please. The asset that we're talking about here, Genius Star 11, we learned about on Christmas Day just last year. So going on almost exactly a year ago, we got a response through one of our partners, the Alaska Marine Exchange down in Juneau, relayed this information, which was initial reporting of a fire in cargo hold number 1. The vessel's approximate position was about 220 miles southwest of the Aleutian Island chain. Those of you not real familiar with the traffic scheme here, so out west for vessel traffic that's departing the Asian market will transit the Great Circle route, which brings it up to and through the Aleutian Islands and then on its way to the western seaboard, points farther south and east. So in this regard, top right corner, you'll see an image on your screen where there are 3 different colored lines. Outermost dark blue line depicts our exclusive economic zone, striking an arc 200 miles from every landmass that we've got out there in U.S., American, Alaskan territory. And then the innermost lines that are red or orange, depending on your screen, those are areas to be avoided, designated ATBAs that are relative to tanker vessels or non-tank vessels. And so the non-tank vessels are at 100 miles, and I'm sorry, the tank vessels are at 100 miles, and then the non-tank vessels are at 50 miles. Those are basically geofences, and through the alternate planning criteria and a few APC providers, one of which subscribes through the Marine Exchange to track the AIS of the vessels that are moving through the Great Circle route. When that AIS position crosses over one of those ATBA lines, it will actually flag and require personal interaction with the vessel. The other way we get notified is, in this instance, vessel master reported to Marine Exchange that we've got a fire and we've got black smoke coming out of the cargo hold. And that was really the extent of it that night. At that point, the command center at the Marine Exchange increases their triage, let's say, of the vessel, designating it as a vessel of concern, and then they go from a passive monitoring to an active monitoring, and of course try to ascertain more information. In the meantime, they're also sharing with us things like what you see in the bottom right portion of the screen, which is the vessel critical profile. And so this is what we have to start formulating our response. And while the Marine Exchange on our behalf, and mind you, most of this is because there's very limited communications like radio or other means of comms. Most of this is coming through like telex or email, satellite. So scant information, but what we do have is right there in the corner. We understand it's a bulk cargo carrier manifesting project cargo of 2,400 metric tons and some high-power lithium-ion battery in the amount of 1,800 metric tons. Departing Busan, South Korea, heading to San Diego, California, and it also has almost 17,000 barrels of lube oil and its combined fuel info there. So we're working through who needs notification. We're starting to get our regional response team sort of summary put together. We've certainly got our counterparts from the qualified individual already working ahead on some of this, but you'll see then going into the next day, on the 26th, the Marine Exchange called out to the qualified individual in accordance with the vessel's response plan and relayed the info, hey, there's a fire, and trying to get more information. Day later, on the 27th, Marine Exchange notices the vessel on AIS tracking, alters its course significantly. So in that top right image, if you can see it, there's a long dotted blue line, and that's the vessel's track line from its original portion, quarter off the screen there, kind of 220 miles southwest of the Aleutian chain. You can see where it heads into the EEZ, sort of skirts across the 100-mile ATBA in between there. And so Marine Exchange monitoring is starting to obviously gain heightened concern, and they're relaying that to us. We have heightened concern. What's going on? What's happening with the vessel? They're not really responding to information at this point in time. And so when a vessel deviates into the areas to be avoided, then of course we have more scrutiny that we need to kind of put on the vessel. They finally got a response back from the master, and the master responded with, well, now we have a fire in cargo hold number 2. And there was a little bit of information confusion there. Was it a second fire in the same cargo hold, or was it in fact a unique and different fire in a different cargo hold? Well, a full 4 days after the initial report, you'll see there on the 28th, the vessel finally activated its vessel response plan. Advance to the next slide, please. So we're still now 4 days into this, working on trying to figure out what is happening. But through discovery, as we're finding more information out from the master, we learned that they had exhausted the entirety of their installed CO2 firefighting system in the attempt to knock down the flames in the first fire in cargo hold number 1. So immediately for us, that triggers an IMO safety of life at sea concern, understanding they have 0 remaining CO2 bottles to fight any other fires in any of the other machinery spaces. And so we're starting to think down this path of, well, how do we get these CO2 bottles evacuated off the ship, hydrostatically tested and refilled somewhere in the United States so that they can safely transit to their destination in San Diego. Of course, we're also concerned about the fire. And at this juncture, the qualified individual who's Gallagher Marine at the time, and we are all talking really within the first number of hours when notification occurred. Gallagher Marine mobilized, and we started doing some pretty ad hoc MS Teams type conversations at first. With regards to the location, I'll show you a slide here shortly about how far out this is. We've got folks from all over the country really responding to this instance with scant information. While we're trying to consider what the explosion hazard is regarding the fire, we all agree that we need to do some air monitoring and try to identify where we are in the combustion zone regarding how we can evacuate the air, do some air exchanges, make it a stable environment. So we start going down this path about how do we resource an inert gas generator? Where is that? Come to find out later, we from the Midwest, and it cobbles together with some things down in Texas, truck transport, airplane transport, a couple of options fall through. We end up utilizing a Coast Guard ready search and rescue aircraft to then fly out from Alaska, load this equipment up, and then transfer this inert gas generator, really under the mindset that we need to make sure that the space is safe. We don't have any sparking or ignition concerns. And realistically, once we open the hatches to this to try and conduct some access and overhaul, do not want to introduce a ton of oxygen, create a combustible environment, and then have a massive explosion. Next slide, please. So we're working a few problem sets at the same time. As mentioned on that slide there, 153 bottles for the CO2 installed firefighting system. We still don't know what we're looking at in terms of cargo. Of course, we're looking back at the manifest thinking, okay, project cargo, not sure what that is yet. Batteries, okay, maybe cell phones, maybe laptops, perhaps it's some EV batteries, but we're kind of working down the path of triaging and prioritizing our lines of effort. Meanwhile, of course, everybody that is now catching wind of this in Dutch Harbor, Alaska, which is a significant distance out along the Aleutian Island chain west of the mainland of Alaska, they've got a network of resources too that they're reaching out to. And so in that vein, we get a lot of inputs, and we suddenly had a lot of experts that were willing to lend a hand and their expertise to the problem-solving effort. And we devised this concept here, this technical expert advisory group. As stated, not all-inclusive, but these were certainly some of the most involved agencies and representatives, to include really everything from academia, pardon me, from places all the way as far east as the UK, And certainly everybody who had more recent experience in lithium-ion battery recovery from the Lahaina fires out in Hawaii. So we had the PAC Strike Team, U.S. Coast Guard Pacific Strike Team, Lieutenant Clayton Hartz deployed up to Alaska, had two additional members that deployed straight to Dutch Harbor. And we had asked Clay Hartz to kind of rally with our scientific support coordinator, Liza Sandin from NOAA, rally this group together and really try to find a focused effort each day that we're problem solving, and then put these great minds together towards that effort. And they produced some amazing recommendations to us in the Unified Command that allowed us to continue working down a very deliberate path towards recovery on multiple avenues. The CO2 bottle problem, the access and overhaul of the fire, identifying what the cargo is, and more specifically, how volatile is the cargo, and what do we need to do to render safe and then make this vessel safe to transit again. Next slide, please. When we were talking through what it is we need to do, we still hadn't had any opportunity to look at the inside of the cargo hold that you'll see in these pictures here until a full week and a half to 10 days into the response, as we were constantly air monitoring and trying to identify really what the safe approach is here. Meanwhile, the vessel is just loitering north of Dutch Harbor. There really wasn't any available moorage space, and certainly not rendered safe enough for us or me as the captain of the port to put the vessel into the port, not understanding whether or not we had an explosive hazard. And so the recommendations that we were getting ranged from all the way at one end of the spectrum. This is a massive explosion hazard. It's going to produce just thousands of cubic meters of toxic gases, so you need to evacuate the entirety of the Aleutian Island, or we're going to kill everybody because of exposure to toxic gases. Other recommendations involved, well, lithium-ion battery fires, there's no way to put them out. It's going to burn too hot, so it's probably going to just combine, melt through a whole bottom of the ship. So evacuate the ship, take it as far out into the deepest part of the ocean as possible, scuttle it, let it sink on its own, and then through the ocean, it'll just work itself out. And cooler heads prevailed. We were able to leverage that technical expert advisory team and combine efforts and recommendations to find a middle ground somewhere between those two solutions. And so we finally got to the point where we could access the cargo holds. This was all occurring during the winter storms that generally push through the Aleutian Island chain. So we had winds 45 to 50 knot winds. We had sea states approaching 20 to 30 feet. And initial indications were potentially that the rocking and rolling of this vessel on its transit caused some of the lashings and tie downs in the cargo hold there to break free. And then a few of those containers bumped into each other and potentially ignited spontaneous combustion. One of the nice things, though, about this occurring during a big winter storm is that you get air exchange a lot faster than what we had anticipated. So while we were planning for maybe a 36-hour to 3-day air exchange to ensure we had a good, safe environment inside those cargo holds, once we opened up the lift, the hydraulic lift on those hatches, it took all of about 36 minutes to exchange the entirety of the air from inside those cargo holds to making it the same air as outside. So we moved fairly quickly through that phase to get eyes on inside there. And this is what we discovered. So next slide, please. We still don't really know what it is we're looking at. These look like a bunch of refrigerators to me, but through our technical expert advisory group and working back to the manufacturer of the battery, we had a fairly quick learning curve. And so each one of those white containers you saw inside the cargo hold is the image depicted in the center there. Each one of those containers stands about 10 feet tall, 8 feet deep, and about 4 feet wide, weighing in at about 20,000 pounds per piece. So when we ran the math on that initial cargo manifest, it worked out to about 4 million pounds worth of lithium-ion batteries. When you look inside that container, you see the bottom right corner is the two doors, double doors facing, and then inside there are these modules. Each one of those modules depicted even closer in the top right image. Each one of those modules contains a number of separate lithium-ion battery cells. And so inside each cabinet, you've got 28 modules, 14 on either side. The opposite side is a mirror image of what you see on the front here. And then each one of those sort of glowing red things is its own lithium-ion battery with its own chemistry inside there. I imagine that glowing red is kind of what it looked like right before things started going haywire and the thermal runaway occurred. But to the top left, you'll see the designed intent for these containerized batteries. Each one of those white sections is about like relative to a 53-foot long 18-wheeler tractor trailer. They'll put all these batteries in a row to build out these battery energy storage systems. And a lot of places out in like the desert in the Southwest will capitalize on solar energy and then utilize these battery storage system farms to just serve as massive batteries to capture all that energy. And so moving on to the next slide, please. When we're working with the manufacturers trying to identify what is inside each battery, how we triage the batteries, what we need to do to render safe each one of these batteries, it took a little while to work through all of that. So we're about 2.5 weeks into the response at this point, understanding that while the CO2 system expended completely, there was no inclination from any of the experts that CO2 actually had any impact on suppressing the fire. Because thermal runaway and what we know about lithium-ion batteries is that it tends to just burn out until the battery is done burning. So there wasn't any apparent charring, but what you do see in the image is some frosting. Of course, we anticipate some of that being from the CO2, but also we're in a winter storm, and there was in fact some snow and some ice that added to the scenery there. Cargo hold 2, you'll see there was some shifting inside that space. We learned from the manufacturers that there shall be no firefighting tools or traditional access and overhaul equipment utilized to get into these cells. So we had to just sort of work down the path of manufacturers' recommendations of what the best personal protective equipment would be. And so they said essentially, because we're not sure of what the volatility of the batteries are either, we recommend this level 4 PPE equipment that really looks like, if you've ever seen explosive ordnance disposal individual in full kit, that's kind of what it looks like. Big spaceman suit with layered density and electrostatic shock protection. So next slide, please. It required the contracting of this company, third-party company, Energy Security Agency. Sounds super official, sounds a lot like a federal agency with its 3-letter designator, but definitely not a federal agency, though they are the experts, as far as we knew at the time, that had some experience dealing with how to access those cabinets, triage the modules inside, and then work through how to declassify them, or further classify them, I should say. So all the air monitoring was ongoing. We were doing this shoreside and aboard the ship, and trying to identify through a series of different experts what we have to do in terms of preparation for ongoing thermal runaway. What we've learned everywhere else from these kinds of battery fires is even if the fire is out, that doesn't mean it's done burning. These can reflash, they can experience thermal runaway again a day later, weeks later, even months later. So we really relied heavily on this Energy Security Agency and their expertise to bring in overpack materials and reduce or mitigate the risk of the off-gassing and any other further flammability concerns. Next slide, please. One of these things here is just kind of depicting what we were angling back towards. Bottom right, you'll see new lashings that were delivered out there, trying to get everything back into alignment. Top left corner there, we had to have some proprietary technology in that rigging to be able to latch on, hoist, and then maneuver these containers. Again, 20,000 pounds apiece. At sea was not a safe place to do it. Vessel moved into an emergency mooring location in direct conjunction and support with our state on-scene coordinators and Alaska State DEC. They have these emergency towing systems pre-positioned in Dutch Harbor. We were able to rig that aboard the ship and then utilize that as a connecting hawser to an emergency mooring buoy that we had kind of west of the populated area. Learned that still wasn't a very stable platform, not safe to utilize the ship's installed cranes, so we were still working towards an opportunity to get the vessel into port and then constant daily stakeholder updates, trying to gain buy-in from the community, certainly through the port and among the municipality. We were working hand in hand too with a couple of the Native American tribes that have a physical presence and equities in and around that area. So under the auspices of trying to render safe the vessel, of course, we still have a persistent threat of pollution. If this thing were to go awry at any point down, not just this chemical hazard, but there's still all those several thousand barrels of POLs aboard. So very, very pristine environmental conditions there in Alaska. There's still a tremendous amount of reliance on subsistence fisheries, and so heightened concern. Were also a couple of encampments down the wind column from where this thing was happening. So the native tribal engagement was critical, as well as all the other stakeholders. Next slide, please. We were working through the recovery path back to the inside of the cargo hold. You'll see here that the ESA, these are the folks that brought in 400 of these barrels. You'll see roughly 100 pallets, 4 55-gallon drums per pallet. Space was at a premium, but a great reference point there between an individual and the size of each one of these containers. The effort there was really to pull out the worst, the most affected modules, and bottom left corner picture indicates those that experienced full thermal runaway, labeled and overpacked everything into these drums full of a glass bead material that if the thermal runaway would occur again, the intense heat would essentially melt the glass beads and fully encase each module, and also reduce the amount of off-gassing that would occur with the overbag, the outer overwrap, and then of course the sealed 55-gallon drum container. Another problem set we were working through is how to classify these materials in accordance with the International Maritime Dangerous Goods Code and 46 CFR for domestic purposes. And we were able to get through that by way of rendering these things as such in these photos. And so during this triage phase, our intention was to just categorize these that could still transport as original and safe, and then those that were then just transferring as lithium-ion batteries inside their overpack. Next slide, please. That was a lot of effort that incorporated time and energy from the certainly EPA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and Coast Guard Headquarters, CG Eng 5, working through the hazmat side of things, but massive team effort. This image just depicts kind of one perspective of what our community air monitoring looked like. Imperative that we were capturing and constantly monitoring any changes in the air quality per se. So west of the landmass you see in the image was really where the vessel was at the mooring buoy, and we were testing the air in every direction. These fixed area arrays, in addition to a couple of mobile area arrays, and a Canadian company, GHD, served directly in support of the air monitoring, and our two folks from the Pacific Strike Team were out doing that effort as well. We were sharing those air monitoring details with all of the folks across the community in those stakeholder meetings as well. Next slide, please. And I'm getting close on time here, so I'll kind of start to wrap up. The perspective here, for those that haven't seen Alaska in any other fashion than we learned in 5th grade geography, it turns out it's actually not the same size as Hawaii, and it's not west of Hawaii either. This is the depiction that shows really the immensity of time, space, and distance. We were working from our incident management team, incident command post here in Anchorage, and this incident was occurring 800 miles southwest of us in Dutch Harbor. The white dotted line is the vessel's track line, and then trying to move logistics, whether that be by air during these massive winter storms, was challenging, and by sea with 20 to 30 foot seas, 45, 50 knot winds, also challenging. And so working through all of this during the same time period, the Pacific Cod A season fisheries opener was ongoing, which means a massive influx of seasonal workers, a lot of fishing vessel activity in and out of the bay, certainly complicated our response efforts. But next slide, please. So where we go from this, right? A couple of key takeaways. We had opened contact and communication with the National Pollution Fund Center under the Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund because of the significant and imminent danger that this vessel posed to the environment. That allowed for us to move some folks in and out of Anchorage to conduct some initial on-scene assessments, and the salvage and marine firefighting maintained the primary line of effort. The qualified individual, again, Gallagher Marine, did a phenomenal job bringing in their team, rounded out the majority of the incident management structure, and we learned very quickly that you'll see in the center section there, we had to ship out about 3.5 miles worth of chain to then further lash and stow these things back in place to render them safe to further transit. Shipping 3.5 miles of chain, one of the biggest logistics challenges I've ever experienced in my life, but it worked out over the course of a whole host of different options, getting them out there. The lifting gear, and then of course trying to make sure we could operate safely through the winter and these storms were significantly challenging. Next month, we're going to be following up with folks in the community. We're going to continue our ICS training. Lack of general knowledge and awareness of how the ICS structure was one of our key takeaways that we're going to continue to try and bolster throughout the entire state. But just want to share that as, not everybody is acutely aware of how the ICS structure works, and maybe doesn't fall into the nomenclature just as fast as we would hope. But can't highlight the goodness that came well enough by that technical expert advisory group, providing a tailored approach to some of the problem sets that they could spend their time working on while we were still conducting sort of day-to-day operations and response activities. Next slide, please. Wrapping up to the end here, 49 days later, after this thing was heading inbound, we rendered the entire vessel and its cargo and replaced 153 bottles of CO2 safely, and it departed Dutch Harbor 2 days before Valentine's Day, better than it was when it arrived into Alaskan waters, and it did make its safe transit and arrival and offloading all of its cargo in San Diego. This was one of 6 vessels that were in a train carrying similar cargoes, so certainly the word was shared elsewhere, and throughout this, and certainly prior to this vessel's departure, I was in fairly constant contact with my captain of the port counterparts down the western seaboard just for awareness. But through regular press releases and increased contact with the stakeholders, overall, I think it was a tremendous success, and all involved did a great job managing what was really a very complex problem out in a very remote region. I'm going to stop there. I know there's other folks following up, but happy to take any questions when the time comes. Thanks, Grant. Back to you.